Okay, who are the Parazoa? Well, this term is the term that's used for identifying the basal group, the first branch off the animal family tree. And so you see a picture there of a couple sponges. Uh, we're going to go through the major animal groups and talk about their position in the phylogeny of animals and their characteristics. Okay, and so this is a little confusing. Who is the Parazoa? It's the sister group to all other animal groups, but we're not really sure who that is yet. Um, the probably the best candidate for that is the phylum Porifera. These are the sponges. They they are animals. They don't look like animals. They don't act like many animals. They lack a lot of the things that most other animals have, but they have, truly multicellular eukaryotes with animal like characteristics. They lack tissues, they lack organs, they lack symmetry, but they do share ribosomal RNA sequences with other animals, and they do things that lots of other animals do. There's about 7,000 marine species and maybe 150 species of freshwater sponges. And in deep, cold areas of the ocean, they're abundant animals. And so they're important in some places. So the Parazoa, sponges, no symmetry, kind of the basics of tissue. What they really have is that they're multicellular. They have several distinct cell types that organize themselves in layers and cooperate to get food, share food, and reproduce. They do share some features with other animals, including they have kind of elements of a skeleton. They can perform or form spicules, which are various hard skeletal like elements, and they make a form of collagen, the most common protein in animals, and we call it spongin, but that's something that they have. These are all filter feeders. They don't have muscles, they don't have brains, they don't even have muscle tissue or nerve tissue. They sit in one place, they draw in water, and then they filter out the particles. Okay, they do have a free swimming ciliated larvae, but the adult or mature structure is attached to the bottom of the ocean or some sort of material, and it can grow quite large and it filter feeds. They have several cell types, and they form functional layers to draw water in through an osculum, kind of a mouth like structure, and then force that water through ciliated chambers that trap the particles. Okay, they'll basically have three layers: an outer layer, and then that outer layer goes into that central cavity. Then underneath that outer layer, there's a gelatinous matrix called the mesohyle, which is where spicules and spongin are found, kind of the supporting structure. And then the inner layer are the main cells, the choanocytes. These have flagella, and the flagella beat in unison to draw water in. And then they also have a little collar around them, and the collar has mucus that traps the particles. So these cells trap the particles and ingest them, and then they can pass those particles on to other cells. So they cooperate. So here's a picture of a sponge, and it shows the water flow in through the pores and out through the osculum. The flagellated cells will line the inner cavity, the spongiocele, or sometimes it'll be kind of a little duct. And those, you can see the arrangement of those cells and the collar areas where the cells are trapped. And then they will pass food particles to other cells there, to amoebocytes that roam through the mesohyle, and the pinacocytes, which are forming kind of an epithelial layer on the outer part of the cell. So that's it. That's simple to them, and they're kind of cool. There's another kind of diagram showing them and the arrangement with the spicules and things like that. The choanocytes are the main cells, or sometimes they're called collar cells, and they're trapping particles. And here, this on the right there, it shows the particles being passed to other cells, amoebocytes, which kind of act like to pass particles. They're going to be the cells that give rise to the reproductive cells and things like that. Very, very simple, no organs, just these kind of layers, no real tissues. Sponges don't have those things. And in fact, sponges, if you take a sponge and run it through a blender and then dump it back into the water, it will reform a sponge. They're kind of amazing that way. Sponges can grow asexually if they're fragmented, or they can bud off new bits. They also can reproduce sexually, where the choanocytes will transform into sperm, and the egg cells can be fertilized, and then it develops into a ciliated larva that free swims and will settle out. Here I have a nice picture of an actual electron microscope view of these. So they have some things that are kind of common with other animals. They can use flagella to produce movement. They have a ciliated larva. They're truly multicellular. The cells differentiate, but they don't form an organ. It's not really fair to say they have an ectoderm or an endoderm. And when we call it the spongiocele, we're kind of being, fairly generous in saying that it's a body cavity. Okay, most sponges are marine. Their importance are basically because they are the original sponge. There's no fossil record of them. I have a fossil there, but that's a fossil of a cnidaria. But we think they're quite old, and their ribosomal RNA sequences are very different from other animals. Okay, I'll end up just by saying a little bit about Parazoa, because the other option for the outgroup, the first branch of the phylogeny, are Ctenophora. These are the comb jellies. And there's anywhere from 90 to 150 species of these. These are small, free-swimming, ciliated organisms, and they are the largest organisms to swim with cilia. These are the combs or teens that make them Ctenophora. They share a what's called a coloblast, which is kind of a sticky tentacle-type structure for capturing prey. And some studies suggest that they are even more different than sponges from the rest of animals, but they do have a complete gut, and they just have more developed tissues. They have these tentacles, which to me seem almost like organs. They have cells that are clearly kind of like muscles, even though they're restricted to the mouth. And so they're a little more advanced. The best evidence, I think, for having sponges as the first branch is from ribosomal RNA sequences. That's one gene, but it's a gene that we know that can't be transferred horizontally. And so I think this is probably the best phylogeny right there. Okay, I'm going to talk about some other animals, and we'll post more on the different animal groups.